Good day. I hope you're well. It's Paul here. I know Dave usually does the talking, but he hasn't got his Christmas jumper on, so I thought I would today. And I would like to introduce to you Rick. Rick is from Canada. He was a paramedic for a number of years, and he also founded the Unbroken Hero project.
Before I carry on, I just want to acknowledge Paul's fantastic. Now you call it a jumper. We in Canada would call it particularly a sweater. But I love it. I love it. But now I should have worn mine. Anyways, so yeah, I've been a paramedic. I'm retired now. I spent 30 years in the service. Started back in 1985. Just to give you an idea of, I started when I was 10 years old. Okay, so anyway, and I was recruited. I never wanted to be a paramedic. It was never on my bucket list to be a paramedic. Like I know in high school they always ask you that question around what do you want to be when you grow up? Aunts and uncles are always asking you, putting the pressure on you, right? I never had an answer. Never had an answer. I could never think of something, and I would just throw something out there or whatever, but it was nothing ever really stuck. And because when I had finished school, I went into hotel management. I was a bank manager for a while, kind of a thing. I had accounting background, and then I ended up in a sawmill, kind of a thing. So and a pulp mill, so I had quite a diversity of different things. It had nothing to do with paramedicine or in that regards, but I was running a small business in the town where I live right now in Chemainus, which is on Vancouver Island, the far west coast of Canada, in the province of British Columbia. And these two paramedics came into my office and said, have you ever thought about being a paramedic? And I go, like, why? Like, what's the deal? And they said, well, they were looking to recruit people because for the station to keep their second ambulance, they needed to have the staff to man it. So they were looking for somebody that was local. I was pretty well across the street from the ambulance station. And they said, if you're on the roster, you can man our second car. It never goes out, right? Never goes out. And it was kind of like on a volunteer basis, even though like I got paid for every call I did, but it was really mostly a community thing. And you said you can run your own business, and then when the pager goes, you just walk across the street, do the ambulance call. They usually only take an hour, so you'll always get back to work, right? And I said, well, okay, it's like something in me just said, why not, right? I was kind of like, earlier we were talking about jobs that really didn't make you think too much or whatever, and it really wasn't into the work that I was doing, and this seemed okay. Let's just explore it. Going fast forward a few months, I got into the schooling, got my certificate at that time, and then they put you on calls, like a supervised calls. So you're in a 3-man ambulance. There's usually just 2 in there, and you go out, and the supervisor, the guy that recruited me, would be with me and kind of watch how I worked with patients, and then would sort of fine tune me as we went along. I swear, the very first patient, nervous as hell, right? And green as everything. And it was a low acuity call, and this person was just sick. And I went there, and my unit chief said, okay, this call is yours. And I knelt down and reached over and touched her radial to take her pulse. And And something at that moment just, just sparked in me to say I was in the right time, the right profession, the right place, the right, everything just right, 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 right. And I literally fell in love with the career at that moment. I hadn't done any other calls at that time. None of the trauma calls ever, kind of thing. But I just knew that I I was in the right, this is what I needed to do. Like, and it really truly became what people term as your calling. And I took it as that. And I had the time of my life. I'll just say that, right? Now, there's a couple of things that prepared me for that. And back in 1979-ish, or somewhere around along, maybe even later, I'm not getting the dates correct, but I had taken this workshop that it's no longer around. It's actually morphed into something else, and it really is immaterial, other than what I got out of it was a really understanding of where my experiences come from, in the sense that I knew that my circumstances, anything that I dealt was being circumstantial. In other words, treating it as it was being done to me as a victim, was wrong, right? And at that time before then, I was a victim, like, and that's why I had so many different jobs, because it was like, it was this, it was that person, it was this situation, all that kind of things that were all, what I thought was driving me. But when I had that shift, that paradigm shift, I was more open to what life had to offer me, rather than sort of like unmanaging it, like letting it like unfold in front of me, and then accepting, what was happening. And that for me, that really prepared me for being open to accept the calling of being a paramedic. It's like, well, why not, right? I, worst case, I don't like it, and we try something different, right? That would be the worst case. So what I didn't realize also was that it also prepared me for what I was about to experience as a paramedic. The the high acuity calls, the trauma calls, and where I was living, we it was a small center, so you pretty well knew everybody in the town. So I had 4 daughters, teenage daughters at the time. So, I was quite involved in the community. So I kind of knew a lot of people, and it was almost like a family service in the sense that there was a very good chance that most of these calls that I would go to, I would know these people one way or the other. And that kind of weighed a little heavy on my mind, because when the pager went off, you didn't know where you're going, and I'd always check to see if my kids or my girls were home, kind of a thing, and then you'd end up going. But there was something calming about not getting caught in my thinking at the time, because a lot of the my partners would say, like, why are you so calm? We're going to a motor vehicle accident, right? And I go, yeah, I know I am, but we're not there yet. And while they were there in their mind, I was driving, or I was just being in the attendant seat. And so I had no understanding of what it all meant, other than I was taking it moment by moment, as opposed to, I was instead of overthinking being over prepared for the call, kind of a thing. And it allowed me to relax and really experience the call for what it was, regardless of what it was. And at the end, yeah, sometimes, and you guys have probably experienced in the services that you have, paramedics have very dark humor. We find a lot of things funny that most people would say, like, are you serious? Like, and there are some funny situations that people put themselves into, and yes, alcohol probably contributes a lot of that, but it enabled me to wear so many different hats because and experience so many different things, and really come from a place of compassion. And it's so hard to explain, but like I said, I viewed it as a calling, and no matter what was happening in front of me, it was happening for me. Like it even as tragic as it might have been, it was I was there because I was the right person to be there at that time. And the miracles that I experienced and the people I came in contact with were mind-blowing. Like, as far as the experience of what I went into and got transferred into the big city of Vancouver, where instead of doing 5 or 6 calls a week, I was doing anywhere from a dozen to 18 calls a shift in a 12-hour shift. It was very, very busy. And it was different in the sense of there was a larger expectation of how you were to show up. They relied heavily on your training, where a smaller area you could sort of be a little laxed a little bit, and the nurses were the bulk of the treatment side, but in the big city, you were it. And you worked very closely with the fire service too. But what I recognized was the differences in the people that were actually doing the work. Like, there were so many different degrees of how the job was, and I'll put quotations, affecting them, because that's how they viewed it. Was where I wasn't viewing the job as sort of providing me with the experience. They were, and I could see how they were taking the work and like kind of overthinking around it, and then having really bad, shitty experiences about it, to the point where some of them, when the pager or the phone would rung at the station, they would literally kick the lockers as they were going out, wishing they could be someplace else. And I couldn't understand that, because I was having the time of my life, and I couldn't, I didn't understand what burnout was. I didn't understand what they were experiencing. And until I got sort of blindsided and blew my back out about halfway through my career. And when the doctor told me that I would not be able to be a paramedic anymore, that I would have to find something else to do, I lost it. Like, I just thought, how could this is my calling. Like, how could you take this away from me? And I went into a depression, like, really quick and really deep. And I started reaching out, and I was continually crying, it's like, and lost. And, and people were reaching out, and he says, well, you could always go into dispatch and stuff like that. And I'm going, yeah, but it was the streets that I really enjoyed, right? I enjoyed the hands-on stuff, right? But then I had that understanding of, like, wait a minute, like, what do you like? And this was like, I know it doesn't seem like a long time for some people that have been in depression, but about 4 days in, I started to come back to the realization that, wait a minute, I'm back playing a victim again. Like, why why is this a career-ending move? Like you don't quite understand what's really going on. And so I started to relax a little bit more and just fall into, okay, so what is really next for me? And it was physio, right? So I started to go into physio, and I kind of put the side of okay, this isn't a career-ending move. Like, you know, like, let's just see what happens. Let's just see what happens. I'm a pretty strong guy. I've been beaten up, you know, broken a few times physically, you know, and I've come back, right? You know, for a doctor to tell me that I can't come back doesn't seem right, even though at that moment it felt very real. And the physio guy was really, really good. Like, he was really kind of a holistic kind of a person. And I never really bought into the notion of people are always broken kind of a thing. And I said to him one day, I said, you know I can't walk for more than a couple of minutes, and I can't sit for a couple of minutes, and I can't stand for a couple of minutes. I said, and I can feel the pain, but I really truly want to understand, like when I feel pain, am I really hurting myself? Like, is something physically happening to me that's deteriorating me, like making it worse? Because I'm happy to keep walking if I know that the pain is not doing any more harm, right? So it's that I had a level of understanding about pain, that pain meant there was something bad happening. And he said, no, nothing at all. Like, where your injury is, that pain is just a signal of scar tissue rubbing up against some nerves and things like that, but you're not doing any more damage to your back. And that was the permission that I needed to keep walking. Regardless of the pain that was happening, I just kept walking. And with a very, very short period of time, there was something that kind of snapped, and I was painless. And I was like, holy moly, did I just have a miracle? It was like, and I was back on the streets again, you know, and in full go, but with a new level of understanding of how I could now understand how the job can really get into a person, like if allowed to. So long story short, because obviously there's a lot of great stories in, you know, and literally thousands and thousands of patients that I saw over the 30 years, I ended up getting into supervision and into the educational department. And because I really wanted to share what I was experiencing with people, and I would with my partners, you know, just telling them, you know, it's like, you know, if they got into their head about the call kind of a thing, because and we've all experienced the zone, like being in the flow. And, you know, and it's usually came from a high acuity kind of a call where there's multiple casualties or something along those lines, like something that really grabs our attention. We come to the call and we just fall into it. And at the end of it, we're all gathered around at our tailgates, sort of going like, okay, how did we ever get through that? How did we ever get through that? And nobody can figure it out. Nobody could, like, I don't know. We just did it, right? We just did it. And I love that flow state. What I couldn't figure out going into the education department was to look at how can we be more in the flow state all the time. And it really came down to how much we were in our heads. And so we actually started, you know, training the paramedics about preparing for the call is, yeah, check your jump kit, make sure your ambulance is fueled up, make sure you've got all your equipment. But where are you? Where are you? Are you in your divorce right now? Are you in your last argument that you had with your partner or spouse, or right? You know, kind of a thing. Like, when you drop out of all this personal thinking and just focus on what's in front of you, you respond accordingly. And so we, and it was really funny because there was a guy that was actually writing a book about all this, and he actually ended up publishing it. But when he first started out, he started to interview a lot of different people, a lot of firefighters and things like that, to ask them about, okay, so when you're in these calls, and when you go into the flow state and into the zone, like, what do you do? And nobody could come up with what they did. There was no like a technique. They just said, I don't know, we just do it. Kind of a thing. And it was like, and after, like later on, like today, I get it, because it's not like a technique where you can actually put a book together and say, okay, this is what you need to do to, I mean, obviously there's some conditions and maybe some other things, but there's no real technique involved. And so when I mean, there's so many other side stories here, and Paul, I probably burned off one of Paul's ears talking about some of them, but I ended up at the end of my career, I didn't leave the career in the way I wanted to. There was a health authority, a new health authority took over our service, and they brought in all their new managers. And so they kind of ended up pushing everybody out, and having a new flavor added into them. So I ended up finding myself out on the street, so to speak, without a cell phone, without anything. It was like really weird. And I thought, okay, like, what could I do more to help paramedics get to that understanding that what they were experiencing, because of all that, the people that were having the shitty experiences, for me, that was optional. Like why weren't other people having a good time at being in a service that they actually loved in the beginning? Like, what really changed, right? And everybody kept pointing to, well, it's the call volume, it's the type of calls that they're doing, it's the nurses, it's the doctors, it's the dispatchers, it's the supervisors, it's the, or like all these different things. And it's like, well, you can't change all of that. The work's the work, right? So what really has to change? And it's inside that is where it's at, right? We can't keep pointing to the outside. And we were really close at putting something together. And of course, when I didn't have the resources anymore, I was on my own. I still wanted to continue that work. And my own personal life got in the way, in the sense of delaying a few things. I ended up getting some cancer, which I took care of. And then the blessings of not having work, I got to look after my parents while they were ill, and my mother when she was severely ill and ended up passing away. And and being the caregiver and having all the skills and various other things that went, like the blessings that I got from being a paramedic and having the time to care for life as it was unfolding for me. But I wanted to bring something more to the first responder world. And I came across the work of Sid Banks via Michael Neal, because I was watching this video of his called "Why Are We Not Awesomer," which is, which was my question to the paramedics: why aren't we doing better? In the sense of not being better paramedics, but just why are we not healthier? Our mental health was deteriorating so much. Like, why we could do better as an organization. And so he pointed me to the Sid Banks work. And when I started delving into his 3 principles and the missing link and second chance and all those books, it's like, that's the secret sauce. That's what's and I hate to, because he used the word missing link. So it's like, that was the missing link to the program, right? It simplified everything that I kind of had an inkling and understanding of, that it's not the circumstances, right? We're experiencing life through the feelings of our thinking, became so much more clear and direct. But in the meantime, like, I've been out of the service for almost 6 years, and I'm sure you guys all experience the same thing, in the sense of there's a family within the organizations that you serve, right? I mean, you are so close to everybody, like, your partners that for a number of years, the associations, the like-minded work, we've got this buzzword, and I'm sure you have it in the military and the police and stuff, is that other people could never understand what we go through, right? It's like, you have no idea what we go through, kind of a thing, when we're up against people don't understand why we are acting the way we are acting, kind of a thing. And I felt that was so wrong, in the sense of, it put us into a different category. It really put us into a label. And I started to see how labels were becoming more confining to not allowing us to be all that we could be. And even the as the diagnosis started to come through, because when I first started, it was suck it up. Like, okay, that was a bad call. Suck it up. You got another one coming. Do you know there's code 3 is our lights and sirens calls? It's like, do you know there's 2 or 3 code 3 calls still holding, right? As soon as you can clear the hospital, we have another one for you. And so you saw people holding back, dropping anchors. I'm not gonna, I've got too much paperwork to do. I'm not going back out there. You can't force me to go. But you would hear this radio. But I was so blessed with good partners and good mentors and good teachers, where it's like, I would hear the radio, looking for a unit. And I would say to my partner, I said, we got to go. And I said, and they would say, well, you haven't finished with this one. Like, you can only do one patient at a time, one call at a time. I thought, well, what an interesting concept. One call at a time, one patient at a time, one step at a time. Right. And so I know that, like, there's only so much that one individual could do. And I got so much out of this service. I felt it was almost like my duty to give back, because it gave me so much. It gave me so many enriched experiences. And to watch people come out of that service with huge, big scars, with so much pain, with so much anger, with suicide on their mind, and to hear then of, as the years started to progress, oh, did you hear about such and such? And I go, no, please don't tell me. Yeah. And then, a good colleague last year, totally out of left field, and with, you lose touch of people, right? It's like, everybody says, oh, I'll come out and have beers with you and we'll stay in touch. And they never do, right? They never do. And then you hear all these tidbits of stories. And then the last one really hit me close to home. And I thought, oh my God, I would never have thought that individual would get to that point where suicide looked like it was the only option. And here I am, I'm sitting on something that I know has saved people's lives. I mean, I'm looking at 3 of them right now. And I can do better. I can do more. And that's where I know it's a buzzword from, I think it was from a Dr. Pettit or somebody, about we are not broken. And when I heard that, I wrote down the Unbroken Hero project. And I thought that would be my focus, would be to go out and find these, quote, broken service men and women, and just share that the suffering was optional, that there was another way. There was, like we could point you in a different direction. And, even, it hasn't been in a big grandiose way impact. I mean, it's been trickling and slow, and part of my messaging and getting out there is doing things like these, podcasts and trying to get the message out. But one person at a time, like, anybody that wants to listen to me, if they come in my radar, I reach out. And if they're willing to sit down for a few minutes and just listen to me, I am theirs fully. And, and just recently, I've a client of mine was sharing, and we've only met for about 3 weeks now. And the first day was, talking about, like, you're not broken. Really? Because I reached out because he was telling people how the system had deemed him broken, that he would never go back to work, never really do anything. He was stuck with post-traumatic stress. He would have to learn to live with it. He'd have to learn to manage it. It was like he felt he had a death sentence, And he says, if this is what my life is supposed to look like for the rest of it, it's like, I just don't know. And, and I was lucky enough that he agreed to sit down with me, and we just shared. And he said, nobody's ever told me I was not broken. See, up to over, it's almost 2 years, a year and a half in a treatment plan. That's all they told him. He's broken and he needs fixing. And I said, no, it's not that way. I mean, and then, we would go into it a little bit deeper, and he got a few insights, and then the next day or 2 days later, he contacts me and he says, I slept the night. And I said, really? He says, my wife thought there was something wrong with me because I slept the night. And he hadn't slept for months. And I said, oh, wow, that's great. And so our last little meeting, he says, yeah, I've slept for 3 weeks now. For 3 weeks I've slept. It's like, and I go, like if I know he's on his way, right? I mean, just knowing that, right? Just having that. And then he says really kind of funny. I was at my therapist because he's got to go to a regular, and it says, well, the therapist asked him, he says, well, what should we talk about? And he says, I don't know. He says, like, I have nothing to talk about. And I thought that was cool. Like, it's like, oh man, oh man, oh man. So I'm here to just tell anybody that's willing to listen that there are other ways, there are other paths, that suffering is optional. You're not broken. You're not broken. And then, that, yeah, I don't know if you got any questions or anything that I know I kind of rambled on a little bit, but
no, that was cool, Rick. Thank you so much for sharing what you did. And it always brings a smile to my face seeing someone talk passionately about what it is that they see and how they see it, and what they see in other people and their journeys, just by pointing out some simple truths to them that they may not be aware of. And it can be that quick, like that chap you've just been talking about. It can be, oh really? And it's a seismic looking in a different direction, and that's it. It's so cool. And while you are saying it's one person at a time, it is for you as you push the domino. But each domino you push picks something up and shares that with someone else, and off it goes. And that's what we're trying to do with this project, a bit like you're trying to do with yours. And the more we get those sort of domino runs together, the more people will hear it and feel it, and and see life isn't as difficult as they think it might be. And as I said, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing what you have done today.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. That is it is so freaking simple, isn't it? I mean, it's so like, and even, like talking with people, they're always looking towards, well, intellectually, like, okay, so what do I need to do? And I go, like, really nothing. Like, no, there has to be something. And I go, no, really, actually, it's really nothing other, if you want something, it really is just noticing. It's just really noticing and using your feelings as that barometer. I really got, that was really, really clear to me over this last couple of months, and it's like, we're all on a journey, right? It's like, even though I talk like I know something, I'm human, right? It's like I get caught up in my thinking, and then it's like, oh, I'm over here. Okay, back down to earth, Rick. And it's really that simple. And when you realize, like the things that made you a really good practitioner are the things that actually make you a really good human, like in really playing a human, right? Because when you really actually look at the elements, right, you were very present. You were just doing whatever was in front of you, one step, right? Yeah, you might be thinking, okay, well, how am I going to get this person out of this hole? Or, you're trying to, that kind of stuff. But really, you were just focused on the patient. You were doing one thing at a time. You were very present. And there's so much in being present, because at any moment of time, I tend to drift, right? It's like, oh, I wonder what the future is going to look like. It's like, I mean, we could go in so many different ways, right? But
how often, see, when you were talking about when you were going to the calls and the people you were with were building it up in their head, it's amazing how often when you let that happen, like when I was in the police as well as in the army, when you get given information by the dispatcher, you start to build a picture of what you're going to face when you get there. And 99.9% of the time, it's nothing like the picture that you. So what you were saying when you were going to the calls and you're just driving, so you're in the moment of driving, so you're not letting that happen, And it's amazing how we build this thing up in our head, and when you get there, then that's like you say, you are in the moment, and it's almost like you can strip back the roles, and it's just like you say, the humans, you're able to help somebody, so you help them. Yeah, it's.
And when they say getting out of your way, that's a perfect demonstration, right, Sylvie? In the sense that, and I had one guy in training program where he was ready to quit, and I go, well, why were you quitting? He says, well, I couldn't do a call if he was dispatched for a chest pain call, and he got stuck on chest pain. And so when he got there, he was trying to put the patient into a chest pain protocol. And so his questioning was and the patient wasn't giving him answers for a chest pain. He was just short of breath, right? Yeah. And he needed oxygen, but no, like, okay, like, you have no chest pain. How come anyways? And he felt really embarrassed about it. But when he realized that all it was that he got kind of caught up in the notion of dispatchers are right, kind of a thing. It's like, you really, really don't know what you got until you get there. And then trust your training. Trust that you will know what that you will need to do when you're not in it, you know, like projecting it, right? Yeah, no, and that's what gets you in that flow state. And it's so amazing how that inner guide really does play a role. I equate it to sort of like that perfect balancing beam, like, you know, like you've got the, you know, when you get too much of that personal thinking, it sort of like weighs off on one side, right? And puts everything out of kilter. But as soon as you sort of let go of a little bit, you find that nice little sweet spot where your skills and what you need, what is being presented, like what is your next step, is in perfect harmony. And it's something that, I mean, in hindsight, backing up, I say that's the only thing I can see happening. But in the moment, I couldn't tell you that was happening, because I can't explain what was happening in the moment. Like, you know, like, how did we get through that? I have no idea. You know, we did 7 patients in 45 minutes and transported, you know, it's like, yeah, you know, it's like, you know, so it's, but it's funny, like, and I heard this at another workshop I was doing this weekend, but it was sort of like, we can get it when we're in that sort of hypered, like a high acuity call, like something that looks like a really like an emergency. It seems like we can fall into that a little bit more quicker. But when it's the sort of what we used to call the granny calls, which were sort of the ordinary, the transport, taking some sick pay, you know, that kind of thing, it was sort of like we were less relaxed. We were more into our heads. Because there was a bit of room in that. And the notion of, why do we pull that out only for special occasions? Why do we forget about our GPS, our inner guide, and only use it for special occasions? You know, and, you know, there's this song, country song, and the lines are like, Jesus, take the wheel. I'm not even sure if that's the and I'm not saying, you know, this is, you know,
yeah,
it's just a label, but the song reminds me of sort of like, okay, like, I'm having a tough time, you take over, right? You know, like, let your inner wisdom take over. And then you're sort of sitting there in the passenger seat going, okay, yeah, I can see it. Okay, all right, my turn. You know, and I'm going to try and manage things now, right? And I have a great time screwing things up. So, and then it's like, oh, wait a minute, you know, because there's really nothing more to manage other than whatever's in front of you at the moment. There's nothing more.
Well, if you think about it, it's impossible to, because it's not there.
Well, you're right, it's not there, but man, do we love to play that game.
Absolutely. There's that cake I'm cooking. I'm thinking about the cake I'm cooking tomorrow. I'm completely lost in cooking the cake. Okay, how does that, is that helping? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's so funny when we see it, but when you're in the moment, when you're in it, right? You know, yeah.
See, when you were talking about the not being broken thing, I think a lot of the sort of the mental health profession from the medical point of view is looking at things from a medical point of view. And it just occurred to me when you were talking, like, say if you fracture your arm, the doctors don't fix it. They just put it in a position and then your body heals itself.
That's right.
But the same happens with your mind, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
If all you need is somebody just to either steady you or just put you in the right position, and then the magic takes over, you know.
Or you can do it for yourself.
Well, and we call that hemostasis, right? And that's, you know, and we use that, you know, in the body, like when you see that in nature, like it's everywhere. The you know, and COVID for me demonstrated it immensely worldwide, what would happen when we got out of the way. because, nature wanted to balance out, right? So anytime that it's scarred or whatever, it's constantly trying to put itself back, balance itself back. And I remember studying one time many years ago about the forestation of the world, kind of things. Like there were so many places that were deforesting, like they were clear cutting and doing all this other kind of stuff, and it looked very like, oh my goodness, like how can the world recover from that? And then you find out that in another part of the world, it's like it's overgrowing, it's flourishing, it's sort of like, kind of thing. So like nature knows how to balance itself out when we get out of the way, when we think we've got a better plan of managing it, right? If we just stop everything, you can see it happen, right? Fish were coming back to streams that never were there before. When the pollution came out of the stopped coming out of the factories, and the air started to clear up, other things started to happen that never happened for years, right? So we forget that there's that mechanism, and it's the same with our physical bodies, right? When you cut off something, or the body goes, oh, I gotta shut the kidneys down, I gotta shut this down, and all this other kind of stuff. That's why clean underwear when you go out, for an accident, don't worry about it. But so because the system shuts down, because it wants to protect the most vital organ in the body, right? It's here. At least the brain thinks it's here. But that's what it does, right? The last place where oxygen resides will be in your brain, because the heart will stop first, and so so there's this residual thing going on there, right? But we forget that same hemostasis happens in the brain too, when we stop trying to manage it. And when you literally stop trying to manage it, it will relax and balance itself out so naturally. And then you could feel the calming effects that happen physically from that point on. It's sort of like, oh yeah, I feel lighter. No kidding, right? No wonder why now you can sleep, right? You're not carrying that big bag of crap with you wherever you're going, kind of a thing. And we have so many terms for that, right? All this baggage. You're carrying baggage.
So something you said earlier, and something Sylvie just touched on there. You were told you couldn't, you won't be able to be a paramedic because your back's out, and there's the danger, isn't there, with medicine? If you give a diagnosis that takes away the hope. Totally,
yeah, and that's where I don't know if you can see this, but it's an empty can, right? This looks like a full can right now, right? So labels are really good for cans, because if you had a pantry with cans with no labels on them, it would be like, okay, what are we having today, right? It'd be a surprise, right? So labels are really important, but they're not so good for people, because the minute the label gets attached to you, and whether that's through a diagnosis or other things like the labels that we put ourselves into, right? I am broken. I am not good enough. I'm not loved enough. I'm not, all these different labels that we put on ourselves, right? All it's doing is it's so limiting us. It's putting us into this little container and not giving any opportunity to be anything else. And we tend to define ourselves based on those things, all those labels, those diagnoses, right? It's like, people almost like, I hate to say this, almost in some ways it looks like, well, I've got post-traumatic stress. Like as it's defining them rather than just describing the behavior in the moment, right? Like if anybody, I challenge anybody that thinks that they're okay to go into the DMC manual, the diagnostic manual for mental illnesses or whatever, and start reading those things in there, they're going to go, oh, I've had that. I've had that. I've had that. Right. And the next thing you know, you're coming out with, okay, I've got schizophrenia, I'm bipolar, I got, post-traumatic, I'm not diminishing that, because in some ways, and I've seen it with a client where there's been some relief in a diagnosis because they've been kind of like wandering all over the place, trying, because intellectually we're always trying to figure things out, right? So as soon as the doctor says, here it is, right? And they buy into it and they accept it. They go, oh, it finally explains things to me. Right? So they get a level of understanding. And the problem, what I see happen though, is that they get stuck at that level of understanding. They start to define themselves based on that, rather than just describing them in the moment. And even Carl Jung, who started this psychology thing, said, like all these things, they only describe people, they don't define them, but people have taken them and ran with them. I'm an introvert, I'm an extrovert, I'm this, I'm right. And that was one of the things I've been blessed with, particularly through that one workshop, is to drop the labels. Like there's no such thing as a label, until it becomes a label. And that's when I realized that I had defined myself as a paramedic. And that became very clear when I blew my back out. And it was like, oh my goodness. I took it hook, line, and sinker. And innocently, right? Like you just don't know, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa. And but that's the beauty of the three principles and the understanding, is that even though you might dip into, and we all get caught up in our own thinking, you notice it more quickly. You notice it, like ever since I've been really tied to this whole notion of the feelings being the barometer, and I can sense that overwhelming. I can sense a change of happening. It's like, oh, okay. Before it was like, it would take 3 or 4 days sometimes. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm depressed. I must be having a lot of depressed thinking right now or something. It's like, oh, and as soon as you notice it, it just sort of starts to dissipate right away. And it's like, oh, I'm defining myself. It's like, okay, I can let go of that for a bit and see what really happens with what's really occurring in the moment. So yeah, I mean, there is something really powerful with that understanding that takes away the power of a label. If that kind of made any sense.
It did indeed. Thank you. Yeah, that labels and symptoms and diagnosis and all the rest of it are a bit of a double-edged sword, as you said. They have a purpose. It's when they get innocently misunderstood or misrepresented in our minds that we get caught out. But actually, they can be a really useful waypoint for where we are right now, in terms of this is how things might feel for you, and this is maybe what that might be called if we were to call it anything. But actually, it doesn't mean anything. It's just where you are right now, and that could change in the next second as something else comes along and crops up in your mind. And
absolutely.
It's a balloon you're holding on to, and then your awareness pops it with a pin, and you don't know what's on behind that. And that's that's the cool bit. That's the cool bit. Yeah.
It's very cool. Very true, Dave. Yeah. The unfortunate part is, there's psychology right now is, although I'm not a psychologist or a therapist or anything, but from my experience, they're really we're getting caught in this so backwards, in the sense that they're treating everything externally. So they're going back after the behavior, and they're characterizing what they feel is normal.
Mhm.
right? And who is really to say it's normal, right? In and I heard from Dr. Pettit, back in the 1950s, there was only like maybe 100 in that manual of different diagnoses, and now like it's encroaching almost 500, right? So it's all describing certain types of behavior bundled up into a label, and then deeming it, okay, well, that's not normal, and yet it is normal. Like we are normal human beings having normal experiences of life itself.
Yeah.
And like Sid Banks said, like if we could only learn not to be afraid of our experiences, like thinking that we have to do something about, particularly the shitty ones. We never question the happy ones, right? And just allow them to experience them. That alone could change the world. That alone, and I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in others, where they become more comfortable with their feelings.
Yeah.
And yeah, and suffering becomes optional, totally optional.
Yeah. And if we notice we're suffering, that's the point, it's the noticing bit that balances everything out again.
Absolutely.
So, it's there to serve a purpose, to say that we're leaning in the wrong or in an uncomfortable direction at the moment. Don't do that. Okay.
Yeah. Time to adjust the seat.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. No. It truly is a paradigm shift. And what I love about what's happening now is that we are becoming more and more comfortable about talking about mental health and and post-traumatic stress. I mean, so what if we've labeled it, right? Like we used to call it being burned out, you're toast, all these different things, shell shocked, right? And the more we understand where it's coming from, that when we go upstream enough, because right now treatment is too far down the stream. It's at the level of the behavior side, yes, we know what you're thinking, so think differently, think better thoughts, have positive thoughts, tap your thought away, kind of a thing, whatever, and cognitive behavior therapy comes, pretty close to the three principles, but it's still downstream. But when we get to the source and understand where the source is, that's where the power is. And the source is that thought. And understanding the nature of thought, that thought is Play-Doh. And we can create anything out of that Play-Doh. And boy, do we create things.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So anyways.
Hey, Rick, that's been amazing.
Thanks.
I don't know, guys. I think you did a really good job there.
I think you did. I think Rob needs to be worried.
Yeah. So like Rob, Rick does actually have his own podcast going now, don't you? A weekly thing. It's on a Wednesday, cool. 9 o'clock UK time. I don't know what that is your time, Rick, but
it's 1 o'clock Pacific.
1 o'clock Pacific. And who's it with?
It's with another coach, and her name's Fatih Light. And I met her in a coaching workshop that I was doing, that we were both involved in, and peer coaching actually. And we were having these weekly conversations, and she's oriented to the inside out, right? But not necessarily like with Sid Banks and stuff. But we had been having a conversation, and all of a sudden she came up with, "Why aren't we recording these?" And I said, "I don't know why. Let's do that. Okay, when do you want to start? Let's go next week. Okay, do you know what you're doing? Nope. Great, let's do it." It's like there was absolutely no, and this is the beauty, like there was no overthinking about it, right? It was sort of like, okay, well, let's go find a program here, we got to grow, and everything just kind of fell into place, right? So yeah, we've been having a lot of fun with that. We interact with the audience through a chat function, and we kind of it was kind of spontaneous. We've kind of settled on picking a topic, but not preparing too much to it, like kind of keeping it very open. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. So thanks. It's called #Wednesday Wellness Show.
Cool.
Yeah, we got our own little Facebook page. No website or anything, but it's, you can get it on the Facebook page and like us and follow us, and be happy to have you involved. So.
Cool. Thank you very much.